Good evening, everybody, and what a pleasure to find you here. Thank you very much to EIG, Fiera di Vicenza, for giving space to education and training. And this evening we have the Italian Gemological Institute with Loredana Prosperi, Lucia Goring, Dr. Pezzotta, who is connected remotely. What are we going to talk about this evening? Tourmaline, a topic that is really intriguing, that gives us the opportunity to go deep into the wonderful world of gems. And I'm here as a representative of Fede Preziosi, and I'm glad to dedicate to the different nuances of gemstones our full attention. So thank you very much for being here. The floor to Loredana, Lucia, and Dr. Pezzotta, who's connected with us remotely, so that you can fascinate us once more. So thank you very much. Thank you to Fiera di Vicenza for finding space for training and education, and for all the very interesting meetings that are organized here. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. And thank you very much to Fiera di Vicenza. Vicenza Oro. I like this name, Vicenza Oro. Thank you for being so open to education and training. For many, many years now, at every Vicenza Oro fair, we tackle a gemological topic. And finally, I have managed to make a dream come true. Tourmaline is my favorite gemstones. So talking about tourmaline today is really rewarding for me personally. I'm really, really happy to have this topic today. So I'm too emotional to talk about tourmaline. I would love to talk about it, but I have two great experts here with me today. Lucia Dori, who has searched everything possible about tourmaline to fascinate you and give you at least 10 pieces of information about tourmaline that you can use when you sell, when you search for special colors. And then we have a grand expert in tourmaline who knows possibly all tourmaline deposits existing in the world, who will fascinate us talking about two varieties, Rubellite and paraìba. So without further ado, I would like to leave the floor to Lucia, who will take us on this journey in the world of tourmaline. Thank you very much, Loredana. Also, because you always give me an amazing assist. You mentioned the word dream. Well, before starting, or better said, to start, I would like to thank all the students, my students who are here with us today. Thank you very much. I would like to go back to the leitmotif of this fair, which is beauty. Well, some of my students, on the first day of school, when they hold the gemstone in their hand, know that towards the end of the day, I tell them, how beautiful you are. There are three different kinds of reactions at this comment of mine. Some have completely been captured by the world of gemstones and don't even hear my comment. Some look around thinking, strange, this teacher, is she crazy? And others ask, beautiful? In which sense? Of course, you're not a supermodel or an influencer, but my pupils are beautiful because when they overcome the embarrassment you always feel when you see a gemstone, and then you learn how to approach it. And there is a whole philosophy of saving time, of preventing the gemstone from being lost, from falling on the ground, visualizing the gemstone in the best possible way. Well, all this makes my pupils, my students, beautiful. So you spoke of a dream, and we're there to protect the dream because our students always have a dream, and that dream has caused them to make an important decision. So we work for this dream. And then I thought about my own dream. That goes hand in hand with Tourmaline, because when I was at university, at first I wanted to study geology. I didn't know there was such a thing as gemologist. So I did my petrology exam. They gave me a section that I had to analyze, and I can see that the professor is laughing. That's not a good omen. She said, look, there's a crystal inside of a species that you have never seen, because at that time tourmalines were not fundamental for the type of rocks that we were studying. So in the end, during the exam, I discovered that it was a tourmaline. And at first I thought, oh my God, how unlucky, a tourmaline. But then actually the tourmaline captured me. And Tourmaline was with me all the way to this stage here today with you. And now I'm a teacher, and I have here many students who have attended my courses. Thank you, Loredana, for breaking the ice with this idea of the dream. Right, 10 things you need to know about Tourmaline. Well, perhaps the best title would have been 10 curiosities about Tourmaline, because I will try to keep it light and funny. So the first thing about Tourmaline is something very useful. Well, we have to talk about tourmalines, not tourmaline, because tourmalines are a supergroup. The name includes many species of tourmalines, the names of which are even unfamiliar to me, because apart from the best known ones, the others are really hard to remember. Secondly, the structure of tourmalines, as our students know, is extremely long and complex, and this complexity gives a high level of flexibility and hospitability. So the structure of tourmalines hosts many ions and cations of different type, generating a high number of varieties, and that's a richness of this group. That includes all the colors of the rainbow. So complexity does not necessarily mean rigidity or stiffness. Quite the contrary, complexity means a high degree of flexibility, and in this case, the structure of a mineral which is extremely hospitable and flexible, that has a huge variety. It is a playground for mineralogists deciding to find new species and name them. And it is also extremely interesting because, as you will hear from Dr. Pezzotta, it is a gemological and geological CD. In other words, it records all the changes of its environment. And this leads also to many commercial names. Giving a fascinating name to a gemstone certainly promotes sales, but it is also a double-edged knife. So we always tell our customers that, right, when you sell something, it is beautiful to use a very fancy name, but it is always necessary to go back to the official gemological classification to avoid missing the reality of the gemstone and to avoid unpleasant misunderstandings. As Loredana knows, I always peek before I show the slide. Sorry, that's my form of anxiety. However, in the slide you can read what I have just told you, but it also tells us that one of the most recent species of tourmalines that has been discovered is called Rubellite, in the name of Barbara Lee Dutrow, who has studied tourmalines. But the nice thing about this is that this type of tourmaline was found in Forno Velasco in Italy, in the province of Lucca, by this American researcher, finally a woman. Women are finally being recognized also in this wonderful world. The other point I would like you to think about is the fact that tourmalines are often different one from the other because of chemicals. If you remember the periodical table that I always mention during my lessons, so there are elements like hydrogen, boron, lithium. Well, these are pretty light elements, and being light elements, they are transparent. Some semi-quantitative investigations that are routinely done in laboratories do not identify them. So the exact classification of a species of tourmaline within the group of tourmalines may require very special spectroscopy. We have also seen that a precise mineralogical classification is requested also by the trade. Our students do not have this kind of tools and equipment, so they cannot do this in their courses. Tourmaline, Rubellite, but they can't say whether it is herbitite, dravite, or whatever. They haven't got the tools to do that, but the market is requiring this. So it will be important in the future to include also this kind of analysis as a laboratory routine investigation. The complicated and complex structure of tourmalines also produces the following effect. Pure tourmaline has always been traded, but it has never been recognized as a gemstone, and it hasn't got the tradition, the heritage, the fascination, the historical background of rubies, sapphires, emeralds. Its name is a recent one, and it's associated in our mind to something that is not deeply rooted, even though tourmalines have been with us for a long time, but they've always been mistaken for something else because of the great variety of colors. So ancient man could not imagine that gemstones of different colors could actually be one single entity, or at least a group, a family of gemstones. And this brings me to the second point, which is the origin of the name. Where does the term tourmaline come from? How did we name tourmalines in the past? How did we call them? One of the most interesting data I found, funny enough, is in the text by Theophrastus in the 4th century before Christ. He came from Aristotle's school, who in De Lapidibus names what was probably a tourmaline, a yellow gemstone, Langurium. That's a name he gave to this gemstone, claiming that this gem originates from solidified lynx's urine. That's it, but the male lynx produces a better-looking Langurium than the female lynx. I'm sure that all the gentlemen in this room agree with that. From the Renaissance onwards, this idea was questioned, and thanks God it got forgotten and only remained in the ancient textbooks. In the 16th century, several misnomers for tourmaline were developed. So Francisco Spinoza, the conquistadores, finding a green tourmaline, names it the Brazilian emerald. And in the 18th century, people start understanding that tourmalines are different. And stonecutters in Amsterdam receive special gemstones from Sri Lanka, and they start calling them with the name that was given to them in Sri Lanka, tourmaline, which means, in Sri Lankan language, color salad. And they start calling tourmaline the Ceylon gemstone. Mineralogist Lemery calls tourmaline the Pierre de Ceylon, and the founder of the classification method for animals and plants, Carl von Linné, calls tourmaline lapis electricus. And this connects with the next slides, because Carl von Linné observed that tourmaline in certain situations can acquire an electrostatic load or charge. Towards the end of the 18th century, the word tourmaline is finally used, but it is tourmaline garnet, which was then shortened by Richard Kirkland to tourmaline full stop, and that was the year 1794. From this moment onwards, it is called tourmaline. Without denomination, an object does not even exist, so you need a name to identify it.
E qui vediamo smeraldo brasiliano, rubino siberiano, rubino del Madagascar, zaffiro brasiliano, zaffiro degli Urali, topazio del Madagascar, e prima che potessi aggiornare la slide ho trovato un'altra perla che è peridotto di
or peridot from Ceylon. While the fascinating names can be used, these cannot be used because they might cause confusion with your counterpart, because it might lead other people into thinking into other stones. But as a matter of fact, you know that this is something improper. So this could, in a way, make your sales easier, but it could cause also a lot of problems. I found a beautiful example in this crown of St. Wenceslaw that was in Prague, where a calcite ruby, which has been found out as being a wonderful tourmaline. In fact, you know, there's a legend of this crown. This crown is never shown. The last time it was shown is 2016. They're very jealous about this crown. The crown is kept under 7 different keys with different doors, and the keys to that doors are held by different people. So be that the mayor, the archbishop, and so on and so forth. Whoever wears this crown, I think they are the king that are about to die within the year. So, you know, tourmalines sometimes can be unforgiving. The other most interesting thing that I found out is that as historians, we've often wondered what was the secret of the wonderful skillness of the Vikings in finding the sense of direction when at sea, especially with rough sea, with low visibility, because sometimes there are very thick mists and fogs with the whole of the ship being in the mist. So we were often, people have wondered how come they could find their sense of direction, hit the target and disappear, going back home despite again, the fog. Certainly, the craft in the shipbuilding was certainly one of the aces up in their sleeve. But thanks to findings in the ships that are shipwrecked at the bottom of the sea, research has been carried out, and very elemental tools were found next to gemstones. Sometimes even tourmalines were found next to the shipwrecks. This means that perhaps the stone of the sun that were, as were called, these instruments, as we thought that might have been, i.e. stones that could help sailors in getting that sense of direction. How could that work? Well, the problem was again getting this sense of direction despite the thick fog that was very often present in the North Seas. You know that locating the sun on the horizon can be very useful in setting your course. The idea, therefore, is that at sunset or at sunrise, when the rays of the sun were parallel to the water, perhaps looking through a gemstone, a tourmaline, or another stone, perhaps the state of Ireland, but even Iceland, but also the tourmaline could work. So looking at the sun rays through the tourmaline, taking advantage of the refraction of these gemstones, they could understand where from the sun was rising. This is a wonderful animation, but unfortunately we don't have the true animation. A stick was connected to the crystal of the gemstone, and a small point was marked on the stone, and you know that two refractant items, you can have the light being difficult to understand where the origin of, but with two spots on the stone, there was a limited margin for mistakes. Just 1 degree could be the maximum mistake in detecting the point where the sun was rising from. At modern times, tourmalines were certainly used by the earlier submarines during the First World War as indicators of the depth of the sea. And that was obtained taking advantage of one of the main features of tourmalines, in that they can be electrically charged if a pressure is exercised or if some heat is generated. So looking at the charge released by the tourmaline and putting it in connection with the pressure exercised on top of the submarine, they could understand how deep the submarine was traveling at, because at the time it was very difficult to detect the depth in the journey of the submarine. And how is this character? Why there is this electricity connected to pressure and the piezoelectricity? Well, tourmaline has a polar axis in terms of symmetry. So if you look at the raw part of the tourmaline and you look at the long side of it, you see that there it is an oriented axis. So the electric charges is always identified by the very shape. And you see that between the two sides of the tourmaline, you have the different poles. Tourmaline is sensitive and vulnerable to the pressure exercised on the sides and also to the heating it can be submitted to. After the Second World War, every time experiments were made with the nuclear bomb, the pressure waves that were released by the atomic explosions were measured with tourmaline-bearing devices. A question that I got addressed over the past few days was the following: how come that watches didn't use this same thing? Because, you know, quartz indeed is charged as with tourmaline, but quartz is much more easily found, and that's why quartz is more used for watches. Even the chemical structure of quartz is more streamlined, so you can easily develop the better suited quartz for watches. With tourmaline, it wouldn't be that easy, and we sincerely hope that tourmalines are never going to be used again for the same purpose. There's another system that can be used for tourmalines, i.e. recording or measuring the pressure exercised by waves on wave breakers. This can be used measuring, again, tourmaline to gauge how much pressure is exercised by the wave and to understand how to better adjust to any situation in case of a sea storm, for example. So now, usually, whenever talking about tourmalines, with to Tiffany as a sponsor, as for tanzanite, for example. But as a matter of fact, a person who found out many gemstones was Mr. Kunz, the vice president of Tiffany, at a very young age. Indeed, as a very young man, at 23, he became vice president of Tiffany & Co. And he never got a degree, by the way, but he had a burning passion for mineralogy guiding him to the top of the company. He gave his name to Kunzite from Kunz, and he described deposits in tourmaline in Bain in California, and he was praising the good quality of these gemstones coming from the above-mentioned deposits. The true fan of Rubellite tourmaline was the last emperor of China. As a matter of fact, it was her son who was the emperor. She was just ruling the country. It was Qi, who had a true passion for Rubellite. The Rubellite that were in the deposit in the Himalaya and in California was basically kept open for her because she was always demanding Rubellite, and indeed the mine was closed when she died. But the great interest that has been demonstrated vis-à-vis Rubellite from Chinese clients come from this empress, not just because the red brings good luck in China, but also because it is historically very close to Chinese past. Because, again, this empress was very much in love with this gemstone. There's another interesting feature that perhaps you had taught me some years ago, and that I found out again, is the so-called Isabella Effect. Many of my past students and many of you are probably familiar with the play of color effect, the change of color, the possibility for certain gemstones to change color, even between red and green, for example. Alexandrite, for example, shifts color, changes color with the use of lights, whether you have warm lights or cold lights. The Use of Tourmaline effect is another change of color effect, which is not caused by the temperature in the color of the light, but rather by the difference in accessing to the deep layer where the stone is found. So this much depends from the cutting of the stone. So it is basically the cutter who may decide about the color, or the final color of this gemstone. The Isabella effect was detected in Tanzania, looking at the tourmalines that were again discovered in the Usambara Mountains. Perhaps our colleague, Mr. Pezzotta, might touch upon that. This is one of the very few images that I could find in the net. And again, it is not the heat in the light that causes this change in color, but it is the difference in the way it was cut. Then there is the so-called Kerys Effect. I am sure that all our students know about the Kerys Effect, and I believe that it is us at the Italian Institute of Gemology that are known for that, because whenever we talk about tourmaline, all students are told that when you calculate the refraction index of tourmalines, you might find difficult, because rather than having a clear demarcation line between a light and shadow that you may draw, so rather than having a very easy reading, you might have more lines and not knowing which is one to pick to understand the refraction index of that gemstone you're analyzing. We often refer to satellite lines, but as a matter of fact, the name of this variation is Kerys Effect. This was found out in the 80s, so very recently, with green tourmalines. And probably, well, perhaps there are too many things to be said at the cause, but probably this effect is caused by what you do when polishing the gemstone. Perhaps you could have more of an aggressive kind of polishing. We don't know why, but if you polish the tourmaline, again, sometimes the effect disappears. So it has to do with the cutting and polishing. But if you haven't attended the color course at the IGI, and you might wonder about this variation in the satellite lines, well, please do consider the Kerys Effect. And then we should also perhaps talk about symbols. This could be very useful when you're selling a gemstone. Tourmaline is the gemstone to be given at the 8th wedding anniversary. So if you're about to celebrate the wedding anniversary, remember that the 8th anniversary should be celebrated with a tourmaline. And I would recommend the paraìba turbulence. So it is the gemstone to be given to all those who were born in October. In Africa, for example, with the Native Americans, apparently it brings you good luck and it protects you against the evil, for those of you who might believe in that. And then, you know, that usefulness is also a good criterion and very practical. And we should also consider the cleaning of jewels with tourmalines. And this is true for all gemstones. I think that all gemstones are indeed could be changing with heat. And this is even truer for tourmalines. So thermal shock are to be avoided because there are inclusions that may be affected. So if you use steam for cleaning your jewels with tourmalines, you know, those inclusions may become larger, thus creating main cracks and fractures. You know that most tourmalines look clear. As for the paraìba, you might see some inclusions, but, you know, there could be inclusions even that are not visible. So thermal shock should be avoided at all times in case inclusions might create cracks. My professor in gemology would say that we should have also certain lightness in touch. We should avoid ultrasounds for the very same reason, because those could in a way elicit inclusions that might react dilating, thus creating again minor cracks and fissures. And another piece of advice that we always recommend is that, you know, neutral soap, soft brush, and lukewarm water is to be used. And please consider that you should also remember not to drop your gemstone in the hole, so not to be dropping your jewel. Thank you. Thank you very much, Lucia. When talking about the industrial use of mineral, as a matter of fact, the use of these gemstones in jewelry seems to be not the top of the list, you know, because minerals are indeed heavily used in the industry to obtain certain aims in industry. But thank God now tourmalines are now widely used in jewels. I believe that Mr. Pezzotta is following us. Mr. Pezzotta is very familiar with not just tourmalines, but all minerals. Thank you, Federico. We're very pleased to have you. Unfortunately, you cannot be here in person because of the unforeseen situation. I can't tell you how long I've known Mr. Pezzotta for, because otherwise I may really reveal my age, but we also have Pezzottite. There's a gemstone that he has found. He has found this mineral in Madagascar. He is very knowledgeable about the geology of Madagascar, and not just that. And he will talk about tourmalines that can be found in Madagascar and in Mozambique. He'll name two species that are most looked after and searched for. I will be using the slides, and I'm going to give you the floor straight away.
Thank you very much, Loredana. I hope you can all hear me. I am very sorry not to be there in person. I have prepared a presentation, and the fact that I'm not there with you does not allow me to see the audience. Usually when I see everybody falling asleep, I changed my presentation. I tried to be a little bit more amusing to attract more attention. This time I cannot see you all, so hopefully I won't send you all to sleep. I'll try to do my best not to bore you too much. I would like to start with some remarks regarding the topic that our colleague Lucia Gori has already addressed, specifically the use of tourmaline. It is true that tourmaline has been used in the past. It was even part of the switching on mechanism of the 2 atomic bombs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But apart from this horrible pedigree, tourmaline today is used in a very diffuse way in the aerospace industry. Because of its piezoelectric characteristics. So tourmaline is present in all the pressure measurement devices and the different parts of the satellite vectors of civilian airplanes, military airplanes, since it allows for the observation of possible distortions in the structures of these aircrafts. So it is a fundamental mineral from this viewpoint. There is a problem relating to the use of tourmaline, the industrial use of tourmaline, because the large crystals of tourmalines cannot be produced synthetically yet. So we have to rely on natural tourmaline with the relevant issues. Just to name one, the huge variability of the composition of tourmaline. Every composition has its own peculiarities, and there are differences in the characteristics of tourmalines, also concerning the piezoelectric response. And then, of course, the crystals are non-homogeneous, and they need to be of a certain size to be suitable for use, and it is not easy to find large crystals with the required characteristics. Having said this, I would like to start with the first slide of my presentation. That's not the first slide, that's the third one. Thank you very much. There you go. Let's start from this one. That's perfect. Thank you. So, first of all, I would like to thank Loredana for involving me in this conference. Thank you very much for your trust and your confidence in me, and for the kind words you spent. I'm not an expert of all the deposits of tourmalines all over the world, but I know quite a few. And Lucia said that I would probably talk about the Isabella Effect, but to be honest, I don't know very much about that. So as you can see, I'm not that big expert you thought. Anyway, this is just a representation of the Earth, focusing on Madagascar and Mozambique. On the right, you can see that Madagascar and Mozambique were part of the same continent. In the top right reconstruction, you can see the situation 150 million years ago. In the top right reconstruction, you can see the situation 65 million years ago. And as you can possibly see, Madagascar, according to this reconstruction, did not detach directly from Mozambique, but came from a northern area, being more similar in geological terms to Somalia, Ethiopia, Zambia. This is a geological reconstruction that works very well from the viewpoint of distribution of the oceanic clefts and fractures, but maybe it is not so good in terms of regional geology, because Madagascar is so close to Mozambique geologically that one seemed to be part of the other. Anyhow, the difference is not enormous. Even if Madagascar came from the north, it would still be part of the very same orogenetic chain, and similar in geological terms. So here you can see Madagascar on the left top part of this picture, and you can see a window. Don't forget that Madagascar is 1,600 kilometers long, so the window that you can see is about 700 kilometers. It encloses this area that you can see better here. It includes that part of Madagascar that contains almost all deposits of polychrome tourmaline. I mean, I've started with Madagascar because I want to speak about Rubellite. And then I will explain to you what Rubellite actually is. But in this area, we have a long list of deposits with three main structural domains corresponding to three large blocks, geological blocks, which are the Antananarivo domain, the Itrema subdomain, and the Ikalamavoni subdomain. The two last ones are subdomains of one single geological unit. And in this vast area, we have a long list of deposits. On the right, you can see only some of them, the best known ones. But actually, these are districts of pegmatitis. It is not one single deposit. So in Itrema, for instance, Sahatani, the first name you can read, Sahatani includes more than 100 pegmatitis, corresponding to approximately 100 deposits. In the next slide, we can see the central part of the highlighted area. I don't want to go into the detail to describe all these geological aspects. Suffice to say that this area, approximately 200 kilometers north to south, is the actual portion of the ancient mountain chain that used to characterize the eastern part of Africa. Well, this chain was built about between 800 and 550 million years ago. And we can very well understand that it was caused by the compression from the east and from the west. So the rocks were actually crashed one against the other. And pegmatites, which are the last to be formed, pegmatites are to be found across all these types of rocks. Pegmatites formed about 530 million years ago, going through all these types of rocks. And therefore, the composition of the deposits, which is significantly influenced by the nature of the surrounding rock, is different. So we have many different types of pegmatites because of the different rocks and leading to different gemstones. There was a lot of boron, a lot of lithium. Tourmaline is ubiquitarian, and the tourmaline of these deposits is incredibly variable in terms of colors. But red is predominant. In tourmaline, red is related to the presence in a lithium tourmaline. There is little iron, little titanium. This would make it black, so I'm talking about a clean tourmaline. And when manganese is present, the variety can acquire a beautiful red color, which is activated by irradiation. The natural irradiation that was abundant in Madagascar, since we have granitic rocks that are rich in uranium, and we're talking of deposits dating back to more than 500 million years ago. So we have the source for irradiation and the necessary time to irradiate the crystals, with the result that we often have tourmaline crystals that are red in color. All these deposits of pegmatite show different levels of productivity. There are many different types. Some are richer, some are less rich. And if you have a look at this scheme, you can see the different types of deposits. In white, you can see the sterile area, and the dotted areas are the rich areas. So you can see that you can have similar morphologies with differences that are very big in terms of productivity. You might have a very large deposit with very small production volumes, or small deposits with large production volumes. And this means that when miners work in these deposits, the frequency of collection is variable. I mean, there are deposits where miners dig for years without finding anything, incredible as it may sound. And there are other deposits where you dig and you immediately find something exceptional. The large number of deposits, the huge differences in terms of the type of gems extracted, and the very nature of the deposits causes the following situation: a production that is very heterogeneous, and it is very difficult to predict. So if you ask me, where does tourmaline come from in Madagascar? I can say it comes from everywhere, it comes from nowhere. It depends on the moment in time, on the situation, on your luck, and so on and so forth. This is a very interesting picture, in my opinion. On the left, you can see a drawing which I have made starting from a real sample of tourmaline coming from Brazil, not from Madagascar. However, the structure type of the samples from the different pegmatites from all over the world is very similar. And you can see at the center of the drawing a large prismatic crystal, which is white in this case. And you can see it has a flat section. This is a large tourmaline crystal that grows together with the crystals of the other minerals that can be found on the left and on the right. So on the left and on the right, we have feldspate, quartz, and mica. And then we have this large tourmaline primary crystal. That is a crystal that grows together with the other minerals. As the others grow, the tourmaline grows as well, and it projects inside a cavity. This large crystal, what do I mean by large? Well, it can be 10, 15 centimeters to, have a look at the picture on the right, 2.5 meters, which is quite exceptional. These large crystals grow together with the pegmatitic rock and expand inside cavities. They change in color as they grow. The change can also be dramatic. They usually start black and take on many different colors: green, pink, red, blue, and so on and so forth, representing a huge quantity of gem quality tourmaline. In the drawing, you can also see some black bars. That's tourmaline of the latest generation, which is usually referred to as pencil. This is a late generation in the cavity. These are late tourmaline crystals, which are small but very interesting from a gemological viewpoint. In other words, if you find a cavity with polychrome tourmalines, I'm talking of a cavity 2 or 3 meters in diameter, you can very well expect, this happens, for instance, in some deposit in Madagascar, to find 200, 300 kilograms of tourmaline coming from the large crystals on the walls. This is primary tourmaline. And generally, with these crystals, you can obtain big quantities, but no quality. So it is a semi-gem type of quality, or carving tourmaline. Conversely, in the very same cavity, next to the 200 kilograms, in the place of the 200 kilograms of the crystals, you might find 2 kilograms of pencil tourmaline, which is an almost clean gem quality. So this distinction is very important because in some deposits you tend to find a predominance of pencils, so small quantity, high quality. In other deposits, primary crystals are predominant and no pencils are there, so big quantity, low quality.
Here you see there's a primary crystal to the left, and on the right there's a pencil crystal. The primary crystal on the left, and these crystals come from the same cavity in the deposit of Angina Madonna in Madagascar. The crystal on the left weighs some 3 kilos, and it is nearly all semi-gemstone quality, whereas the one on the right-hand side, which is 50 grams, is for 10–15% of its volume could be faceted and used in good quality gemstones. Now, I won't spend too much time on this slide. This is an interesting quotation because it shows that Alfred Lacroix, who is actually the father of mineralogy in Madagascar, in 1922, already said that there were many deposits of tourmaline in Madagascar, but what he highlighted was also the incredible red color of that tourmaline. If the red color of tourmalines of Madagascar still comes as a surprise, well, at the time, in 1922, it was quite unique, because so much red color tourmalines had never been seen before. Next. Now I'm going to show you an overview of a number of deposits that are still producing, but, you know, as there are no organized mining activities, also because the legislation in Madagascar is such as not to make it very recommendable for investors. Nearly all these deposits in Madagascar are in the hands of local businessmen who do what they can So much depends on what the market demands at a certain point in time. The driving force in the market of tourmaline in Madagascar is given by the semi-gemstone, i.e. that market that would repay $0.5 to $3 per gram, because this is the material which is produced in large quantities and is then exported to Thailand and then, or India even, and then it is marketed for cabochon, for spheres, for various artifacts, or for a very small cutted gemstone. So when there's a request for this material, everybody does their best to look for tourmaline, and the byproduct, as a byproduct, sometimes good quality tourmaline is found out. So when there's no request for lower quality tourmaline is there. If there's a low demand, then usually deposits are abandoned. The one that you saw in the picture is one of the largest that I found in Madagascar. And please consider that out of this deposit over the past 15 years, some 50 tons of tourmaline was mined. Next. This is the model condition. You see that safety rules are quite incredible. That well where I was going down was over 20 meters long, and you can see that there was quite a length of rope. So basically the pole is turned, and with the adequate skill, you see you have to go down 32 meters in the well and find the deposit. Look at the kind of excavation here. Everything is handmade. And so you might think that it took some 20 years. No, it would take them maybe 60 people over a year to do that, to mine that. Well, perhaps they'll continue the next year, but this is not the case, because then the rain comes and basically all the work is cancelled out. So as for mining activities, basically it is of inconsistent kind of approach, where mines are excavated, abandoned, re-excavated, because when the rain comes, they are again done away with. So after the rain season, they start again from scratch. In Madagascar, time is not an issue. Next. Another overview of other samples, of other crystals, which show you how color is distributed along the same crystal. We were saying earlier on, tourmaline is a mineral forming crystals with variable shapes. These variable shapes give rise to different colors. What we are most interested in at this point in time is the red color, and as you can see, red is not the whole gemstone, but just a cross section of it, with different color characteristics anyway. If you find a well-formed crystal that within the deposit, within the vein, if we can observe that as a whole, you can see that the crystal is made out of different stripes of colors. If we don't find this crystal as it is, but we only find fragments, we could find some little pebbles of different colors. But these colors result from complex crystals, as the one that you were seeing in the slide. Next. Again, other crystals of tourmaline. Look at the red cross-section. It is quite incredible. On the left-hand side, well, it weighs some 5 kilos, but the cross-section with the right color with red account for some 2-3%. More colors, again, that are typical with the tourmalines in Madagascar. On the left-hand side, you see a crystal that is 5 centimeters long. It comes from Bongo lava. It has an extraordinary shade of red. It comes from a totally unknown area. When it comes to tourmaline, it is in the center west area in Madagascar, and it produces only a few kilos of material. A lot of people were drawn there to find more, but as a matter of fact, it all ended up with much ado about nothing. The color of this tourmaline was such that the fragment that could be of interest for gemology, the fragments, the large fragments of interest, measuring some 10-12 grams that were clean, were paid over $1,000 per gram in the middle of the forest. And so there is an outstanding interest for this color of tourmaline. Here you see another wonderful crystal. This comes from Sahatani. More colors, again, different shades of red, again from Sahatani. This is yet another pegmatite of the Sahatani Valley with crystals of extraordinary colors. Again, different deposits. Each of these samples come from a different deposit. So you may say that many different deposits generate crystals of very interesting shades of color. This is a wonderful image. Here you can see a 34 centimeters tall crystal weighing over 11 kilos on the left-hand side. What you see on the right-hand side, it's a cross-section of the prism that was torn off from the basis. So that fragment on the right-hand side weighs over a kilo. And this is another consideration that I wish to make. The wonderful quality of this fragment is of the greatest interest. If we were to buy the crystal to the left, based on the quality of the one to the right, you would run bankrupt, because if we were to cut the huge part, well, the part with that quality is just as the basis of the crystal. I've been looking at many crystals mined in the same mine that were very interesting size-wise, but the best quality was only to be found at the bottom. So out of a total length of 34 centimeters, it was only the bottom 7 centimeters that were interesting, and the crystal were much less interesting at the top. So when you see a smaller crystal, you may be more accurate in your forecast, because with larger size crystals, you might be led into mistakes. Now, additional images are showing you that there are zoning of color, and please consider that when pricing this type of gemstones, you should heed the different zones. Now, in terms of decoration, certainly this is very attractive. More giant crystals. This again was in Bonoia area. This is a crystal measuring some 2.5 kilos that was sliced, and you see the different colors it has. Here the colors are quite extraordinary. And here you see the treatment that the mined crystals are exposed to when the quality is good. Now, these images are very well known to those of you who are experts in the industry. The raw is then classified. Once it is cut, it is classified into different color categories. Now, to talk again about the Rubellite of Madagascar, I would like to say the Rubellite in Madagascar has one main advantage. Perhaps it is not well known in the market as the one from Brazil or from other mines and other areas. It is especially known because of the past history. Why is that? Because the Rubellite coming from Madagascar has a problem in that it is not very homogeneous. As the gem market is a bit like that of potatoes, in that gemstones should be always the same, because when you have a batch of potatoes, you want the batch to be uniform with no diversity. So oftentimes a greater price is paid for batches that are always of the same size of elements. In Madagascar, you have a lot of heterogeneity in terms of size and color, and this makes the price that is paid for that less attractive. In other deposits, I saw that oftentimes the elements are radiated, heated, made all homogeneous, so they look all the same. And that, in a way, when you use heat treatment, you use low temperatures, so laboratories don't ever keep track of that. Radiation for tourmalines is never identified, and so on and so forth. Now, I don't want to be controversial, but I believe that Madagascar tourmalines are to be appreciated because the Rubellite coming from Madagascar, if you were lucky enough to touch it, is actually much more natural, and the different hues are nothing but an advantage and not a defect. So this is what I'd like to stress. I'm sorry I took up so much time, but at this point in time, I'd like to add the following.
So if you can bear with me a little bit longer, I would like to quickly hint to paraìba from Mozambique. Now, we have moved to the province of Nampula. Loredana, what do you think? Would you like to see if there are any questions? No, please continue with paraìba. Okay. Are they all still awake? Nobody's snoring? No, they're all awake. You have approximately 15 minutes. Great. So this is the province of Nampula. This is the area with these granite domes emerging from a flat land, a plateau. The flat land is characterized geologically by the presence of metamorphic rocks, which are often heterogeneous, containing pegmatites. This area is very similar to Madagascar. I have worked both in Madagascar and in Mozambique, and I have the impression that the soil in Mozambique is even older than the one in Madagascar. I'm not talking of the rocks, I'm talking of the soil. The soil of Mozambique really seems to have matured over a very, very long period of time. So the longer it takes to the soil to be formed, the more gems you can find, because more gems have accumulated in the soil. This is a fundamental point. And now I would like to quote an example to best explain why we have residual deposits in Africa that do not exist in Italy, for instance. Let's take the Alps. There are no residual deposits of gemstones in the Alps. Why? Because we do not have the soil that can contain them. I mean, we would have gems, sapphires that can be found in some metamorphic rocks, corindons of different colors, aquamarines, I mean, granites, as many as you want. But as a matter of fact, you do not find the gems in the Italian soil because we do not have the right soil. It did not evolve over a long period of time because every so and so many thousands of years, the ice age takes everything away and the rocks are left naked. So we see many fresh rocks. In Africa, conversely, especially in Madagascar and Mozambique, glaciation never occurred. They have had no ice age. So these intense erosive phenomena are totally lacking in Africa. And the rocks gradually degrade. They literally rot and erode. The water takes away all soluble ions, leaving on site all what is insoluble. Therefore, you have a thickness of soil of 15, 20, 25 meters, and this soil has matured over a very long period of time. So how long does it take to produce a soil with these characteristics? Probably dozens of millions of years, which means, for sure millions, but probably dozens of millions. So this means that the thickness that we see, consisting of soil material, is the residue of the erosion of huge rock layers. Don't forget about this because I'll come back to this later on. So what do we actually find in the soil of these deposits in Mozambique? We find these spectacular gems. These are all tourmalines, rich in copper, that are classified when their color range is between green and blue-purple. Well, in this case, they are classified as paraìba. And now we're opening a whole chapter. I mean, all the tourmalines that you see also on the right, also the darkest ones, which are actually red, well, they also contain copper. If they were cut, the red ones, they would not be certified as paraìba. They would be classified as Rubellite, Cuprian Rubellite, because they actually contain copper. If you heat it, it becomes blue, and then it is classified paraìba. So this is a point that should actually be debated in terms of nomenclature and laboratory criteria and parameters. This is a wonderful picture. Here you can see the variety of the most typical colors in the natural rough prior to heating. Once again, potatoes are back. I mean, you've seen the beautiful colors of these tourmalines. If you were to cut them as they are, you would have a huge variety of colors, very pleasant ones, very often with this neon effect related to the presence of copper. However, it doesn't go that way. The market does not ask for this. So they're heated, they become completely blue, And we can only evaluate the different gemstones based on the different nuances of blue, with the green, with the level of saturation, the purity, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, working in this way, we lose the intrinsic beauty of the original rough stone. That's the result. Heated and cut. It is not a very good picture because the green is too green and the blue is almost tanzanite-like, but this is just to give you an idea of the different colors of paraìba on the market. This is just my drawings. The two deposits in Ligonia producing paraìba, one close to the other. They're called Mavuco and Maraca, a few kilometers apart. And there is actually a continuous deposit connecting them both. The length is about 6 or 7 kilometers. Let's not forget that this variety of tourmaline was discovered in the soil of this region in Mozambique only a short time ago, in 2006. And everything has happened since 2006. In the initial phase, several companies started searching for paraìba, producing many craters in the soil. This is what is left over of the excavations after 2006. And this area cannot be easily reached today. So there are areas that have been totally excavated. There is still a good possibility of finding gemstones. There is still some reserves, but if you work in an area that has been dug haphazardly and randomly, you have to spend a lot of money and results are not excellent. Without mentioning the bureaucratic issue, which is incredibly complex. It's very hard to get a permit. These are more recent excavations. The previous one was a legalized excavation that was done between 2006 and 2009. This is an illegal one dating back to 5 or 6 years ago by a group that actually also managed to obtain some results. This is another type of soil. These are the so-called white sands. The gems are deeper. This is just river sand covering the ancient soil, and the gems are to be found in the ancient part of the soil. And these are heaps of washed material. On the left, you can see a heap, which is the artificial hill for the washing facilities of the only company that now operates on site, Mozambique Gems. This is the selection area. And in the background, the washing facility. About 500 tons of material are separated each day, producing about 200 grams of rough paraìba. So this gives you an idea of a very low concentration. I mean, production is ongoing, a lot of material is processed, but you obtain only 200 grams of rough out of 500 tons of material. 0.3 parts per million. Remember that a gold deposit must have at least 1 part per million. Otherwise, it is pointless to mine it. So here we're talking about a much lower concentration. More drawings. This is a vertical section. I apologize for the poor drawing. It's a vertical section of the soil. In the upper part, you can see the iron cuirass, 50 centimeters to 1.5 meters. Then you have an area with ferrous nodules dispersed into finer material with some quartz granules. This is 0.5 to 8 meters. All this part of the soil is called cororo and is sterile. So all this is above the so-called camada, which is that part of the soil, which is about 0.5 to 1.5 meters. But this thickness can also be only 10 centimeters. And gemstones are to be found only in camada, in the camada part. So to have access to the camada part of the soil, you have to remove 2 to 10 meters of soil above. Therefore, what do garimpeiros do? The illegal diggers dig in the cororo, they reach the camada, and then they dig tunnels with the risk that the above cororo may collapse. So you can see the shaft on the right, which is more than 10 meters deep, because when the camada is very deep, they actually go into such a depth as 10 meters. As long as I did not go there, this had been viewed as a flood deposit. And this was based on the type of material that was collected in camada. Everybody said, well, these are pebbles, so it is flood material. As a matter of fact, when I went there for the first time 5 years ago, and now I go there regularly because I'm a consultant of the digging company. So when I went there, I realized that this is not a flood deposit. It is a residual deposit. Therefore, these gemstones have accumulated from the erosion of a huge thickness of rock above, and the gemstones were left there as insoluble material, and they have produced this horizon where they are scattered over a large surface. So by washing the camada, you obtain 0.3 grams per gemstone for each ton of washed material. Next one, please.
A couple of images here to show where pegmatite had been discovered. Throughout the region, there is no pegmatite vein that can produce paraìba tourmaline. This paraìba tourmaline is not known at the moment to be included in the pegmatite of the area. Informally, I can tell you that I've been told that there's copper in the tourmaline of the pegmatite vein, proving that these deposits were formed on the spot. What I think it should be found out that research is coming at a turning point. These deposits are rich in very different material. This was fluorite that was weighing some 5 kilos. On the left-hand side, you see something green. That is amazonite. That is the typical feldspar to be found within this pegmatite. At the bottom low, you see something different, but feldspar is a very nice moonstone as it emerged when lighted up with a special lamp. These are just my notes that I won't dwell upon. And this is a very beautiful image showing that this cave is a huge geode that we found in one of these deposits. This is a collapsed geode with tons and tons, tens of thousands of material that was landslide inside. At the basis of the geode, tons of tourmaline of different colors were mined with the yellow, red tourmalines, with some light blue tourmalines that with copper inclusions to bear witness to the fact that the origin of copper-rich tourmalines is local. Having said as much, my presentation is over, and I am ready to take your questions if you have any. Well, first of all, thank you, Federico. Thank you. I'm sure that you have invited many young students to become hunters of gemstones, because looking at your journey or your trips, we are more than drawn to come and look at the same areas. What about that pegmatite lamps? What about the amazonite and the moonstone? Is that used, or is it considered just a debris or just a wasted material? Thank you for your question. Let me start from an assumption. You know, our approach to gemstones is heavily impacted by our training and education. We start learning that these are gemstones and minerals, but oftentimes those who mine into these deposits have never seen anything but what is just worth a lot of money. This is what they look for. So when that excavation was carried out, they found out that the fluorite that they found had been piled up into a heap next to the wasted material because it looked nice and purple, and they had heated up because they didn't know how strange that tourmaline was, and they became just a white gypsum. So just they've thrown it away. Then they found heavy metal masses, and they tried and used that. They thought there was tin, and they tried and use it in the workshop, of whether they could use it. It was all massive bismuth. So I found that they were burning native bismuth, and that had already been molted. And they said that this was just an experiment, and we threw everything away because it was good for nothing. As for yellow and red tourmaline, well, they are finally understood that there's a value attached to that, so they basically put it away. And as for amazonite, they just threw it away because they didn't know what to do with it. As for moonstone, they didn't know it was there. I just realized it was there when I was walking down. I showed them that that was a gemstone that could be worked, but they said, you know, they were just interested in the money they could get from it. This modest quantity, you know, you could get some $50, $60 per kilo. And they were not interested. That was little money. Just let it in the waste. Just that they were ready to throw everything away. So unless they found blue beryllium or tourmaline that can be easily treated and nicely cut, they throw everything else away. Thank you again, Federico. I remember that Pinocchio, when he had had the pear, didn't just the good part, but then he ate also the seeds and the skin. Well, perhaps this is going to happen also with these deposits. Now they are just take out tourmaline, but they're going to use all the rest. Thank you very much. It was very nice to have you with us. We're very sorry we couldn't be with us. And thank you to all of you in the audience who listened to us for over an hour and a half. Thank you very much.